This is the webinar on how to structure a venture studio for success. So if that is not what you were expecting to see when you signed up for this webinar, forget whatever it was that you were going to join, because this is going to be a lot better. This is probably one of my favorite topics. So I'm Maya Palmer, editor of GCV. And we've been doing quite a lot of webinars on the subject of venture studios and venture building. A lot of GCV's work is looking around venture investment, so minority equity investment in startups by corporates. But this has become a real trend that we're seeing pick up. And a lot of companies are now interested in using this tool in addition to some of the other things that they're doing, sometimes even focusing on that as one of their main activities. So we wanted to go deep and quite nitty gritty in this one and look at really how to structure a venture studio. And I have the most amazing panel to help discuss this, because we really have a range of experiences here. And so I'm going to quickly whiz through who our speakers are today. But Jonathan Sagot and Byron Dailey from Fenwick and West are really specializing in this topic. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan and Byron, if I've got this the wrong way around, but Byron tends to sort of talk to companies about the sort of overall structuring, positioning of this, and then Jonathan gets involved at the point when they're sort of actively building the ventures and helping them through that. So we have two kind of different ends of that venture studio experience represented here. And then in terms of the practical experience, it's a really exciting panel, because we've got Lena Arbelayes, who's the head of decarbonization ventures at Anglo American, who I think it's fair to say probably represents kind of the widest sort of range of experiences, because Lena obviously does equity investing, but uses venture building as a tool, does this in a variety of different ways. So really kind of rounded perspective there. Then Eva Wang, so very excited to have Eva here. So AI Fund is obviously a bunch of outstanding founders who've kind of now using their experience to help other people build AI companies, and has a really specific methodology and way of doing this that she's going to share with us. And then last but not least, and you will have seen him on other webinars that we've done on this, but Gurdeep Singh Kohli from SC Ventures, who SC Ventures, if you don't already know, have really gone again very big on in terms of the venture building aspect of their venturing activities for Standard Chartered Bank. So, really doing a sort of industrialized methodology for this. They've created 15 ventures so far. And so again, everyone on this panel has really thought quite a lot. They don't all have identical structures. This is where it's going to be an interesting discussion, but are really can share some of their experiences, so that if you are thinking about going into the venture studio game, you can learn from their expert advice. Just a very quick slide from me, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panel. But this is when we did our annual Keystone survey, where we ask CVC units around the world sort of about some of their methodologies and tools that they use. We saw that venture building, that's the gray bar there, 37% of them will be looking at that in addition to the other sort of venture investment activities that they do. So it really is picking up in popularity. And now, without further ado, I'm going to give you this slide and ask Byron really to talk us through, to almost to set the scene in terms of when you're thinking about the corporate venture studio model, how you might start that, and then we'll go into sort of the practical experience. But thank you, Byron.
Sure, thank you, Maya. I just want to spend a couple of minutes briefly highlighting sort of what this slide is about. I saw in the comments that everybody's going to get a copy of this slide. There's a lot of words and pictures and lines on here, but I just wanted to highlight that when we think about how to sort of set up a venture studio program, whether it's an independent standalone venture studio or like the ones that are described in the white paper that's linked at the bottom of these slides, or if it's a variation on that to fit a corporate venture studio, like in this diagram here, we really focus on some important big picture items that we try to optimize for. Things like tax efficiency, alignment of interests among all the stakeholders, including, you know, the folks at the startups, the team at the company that's working on the studio and the venture building, the company itself, of course, later investors, everybody. Also, you know, flexibility, you know, modularity, meaning that, you know, we like to be able to set these things up so that if things change, we can sort of add things or change things or take things away. And so this slide sort of highlights kind of what I feel like is you know, one ideal type of way of looking at how to set up an in-house corporate venture studio program that's funded purely by the parent corporation's money, and where there's a team, a dedicated team, you know, the studio employees working on building these. And this sort of shows in a lot of detail that I probably don't have time to cover here, but where the pre-incorporation IP is created, or how it gets down into the startups where it belongs, because it really, all that IP that's created up at the parent really needs to get down to the startup so that they are able to get financing or bought later. But really the big piece in this one that's, you know, fairly distinctive is this the sort of bottom left triangle here, the Studio Equity Holdco. And what this is designed to do is create a very efficient and flexible vehicle through which the employees can share in the success of the startups that they help create, so that their you know, financial incentives will be perfectly aligned with everybody else that benefits from the success of the startups that they create. And so this, you know, I note in the comments that this is optimized for US tax law, because this thing called the profits interest is a creature of US tax law, but it can be translated into other jurisdictions too. And we've done that in many instances. So I don't know, I don't want to dwell too much on this before, you know, I could talk on this for hours, literally, but Maya, would you like me to, what do you want me to focus on here? What do you think would be helpful?
I think we can come back to this slide if
Sure.
we need to, but why don't I flick that off for the moment, and we can go to the sort of more general discussion, because I think what would be quite interesting is maybe even to hear from especially our three practitioners on the panel, sort of reactions to that. Maybe if we start with you, Lena, you know, in terms of, I think you've looked at you know, a variety of models, doing creating things in-house, creating things in partnership with you know, an external studio and so on. And I just wondered what your thoughts were in terms of methodology.
But in terms of the structure, makes sense to keep it inside or outside. I think it all depends on the corporate and on the technology. So just to give an idea of it, let's say if you're a fast-paced corporate developing lots of exciting, potentially useful IP, then you're probably have an advantage to spin that out, monetize it instead of keeping it on a shelf. On the other hand, you may have lots of operational experience, and you have identified technology gaps or inefficiencies that need closing. So probably in that scenario, you would be better off nurturing some innovations, as you would like to identify multiple pathways and options to do trials. And for that, you can work with multiple players in the ecosystem, even with multiple venture building studios. Just to kind of give it a more tangible approach, I may even share a couple of examples for what we are doing. So as you were introducing my team, so we are part of a mining company. So our main focus is as operators. So we identify opportunities, let's say, in water desalination, soil remediation, steel decarbonization. In all of this, we work with external venture builders that are scouting opportunities out there in the market for these opportunities. On the other hand, we also have done in the past and are working on spinning out a couple of technologies in the mining space. So I guess the right answer on the structure is not if it's in or out, but the one that is helping you create and capture a competitive advantage. So if it's in, as you were mentioning from Standard Chartered, you want a factory for monetizing IP, then you want maybe you want an internal capability. If your unique opportunities about the knowledge you have in a technology and an opportunity you think it can become a company, then maybe you will do it outside.
Yeah, and I'd love to ask you more just about sort of how you when you're spinning something out yourself, again, whether this structure makes sense. But I think let's pause that for a moment. I'll come back to you. I'll give you a few minutes to think about that, because I'd love to hear from some of the others on the panel, just on sort of reactions to the structuring question. I mean, maybe going to you, Eva, next, in terms of, I think you have quite a specific methodology that you recommend when you're working with your corporate partners on these. Are you able to sketch out what you do?
So we are a venture studio, meaning that we build startups, and we build startups with our corporate partners. We also build some startups ourselves, and then we fund them. And so that is our business model. And the way we work with corporates is that we would get together with them and have first sort of a high-level presentation to the executive team on AI technology. And we also strongly recommend our corporate partners to kind of learn about generative AI in particular at a more business level. And so the founder of our fund has a course on Coursera where he goes through that. And it's very effective in terms of helping executives understand how AI may be applied to their specific business. At AI Fund, we consider ourselves AI experts, and so we don't consider ourselves any specific domain experts. And so what we like to do is when we work with corporates, they are able to be the domain expertise and subject matter expertise in their field and their vertical, and tell us about the problems that they're experiencing. And after learning about how AI can generally be applied, then they may come up with specific concrete ideas on how AI could be applied to their business problems. And through that, we brainstorm on AI projects, potential projects that can address those problems that they've identified in their vertical. And then we at AI Fund, we have engineers, we have AI experts, and we also have our kind of business marketing experts. And so we will do project feasibility on those ideas, both from a business perspective and on a technical feasibility perspective. And then we kind of go together with the corporates again and discuss on how to prioritize and select the specific projects to kind of execute on. And like you referred to earlier, there are some projects that are fit for internal, some are more fit for being spun out. So where we come in is we would work with corporates on ideas where it is a fit to create a new company, a new startup. We don't work on the internal projects, and the internal projects would be ones that the companies, after this brainstorming session, may decide to work on internally. And then long-term, we will continue to be there to provide advice and strategy and provide training on AI-related topics.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our model.
Yeah, no, it seems very clear. What happens in terms of, because you invest in the startups that you create, does the corporate also co-invest with you on these? How does the ownership structure work?
Yeah, I think typically the corporates would invest, but it really depends on each particular corporate's preferences in terms of what they like to do. Sometimes companies don't have as much resources that they are planning to allocate to work on a particular project, in which case we're fine doing the bulk of the work, and the corporate can make a decision whether they want to invest later on, or some corporates prefer to be a co-founder the way we are and come in at the very early stage and contribute a lot of their resources and sometimes their assets, and it depends on each corporate's preferences.
All right, it would be lovely to dig into some of those specifics and in a little bit. But again, in the interest of moving this around, so Gurdeep, coming to you again, SC Ventures has taken a particular methodology and so on. If again, how do you respond to sort of some of that diagram that we saw from Byron in terms of how do you structure? Is it different from how you would structure something with your ventures?
I think the slide which Byron shared resonated with our model quite a bit. If I could read it, whatever I could grab, I think the main point in that slide was you have to have a legal entity structure, and the different entities or ventures are also separate legal entities in itself. This is exactly how SC Ventures is set up. SC Ventures at a platform level is already a holding company structure in the Standard Chartered Banks group structure. And within that holding company structure, we have all the 15 ventures we have launched. They're all separate subsidiaries and legal entities. So the main principle has always been that and we believe firmly that if you are serious about venture building, and I think Eva mentioned, these are not internal projects. These are set up from the word get-go as ventures. And the principle itself is these are legal entities. In fact, the legal entities also are under a different brand names and therefore under a different governance and board structure. That is how we have set up all over 15 ventures. And I know one of the questions which keeps coming up, which is spin out or internal. And I was grappling with this question quite a fair bit, which is what do you mean by spin out? Meaning, if you have a subsidiary or a venture which is 100% owned, do you call that a spin out? Not really. I think the spin out really happens when you are, I would say, deconsolidating or reducing your stake over a period of time. But if you want to create new businesses, especially in larger organizations, the principle we believe quite strongly in, that they do need to be set up as separate entities and subsidiaries. And we can cover more about the pros and cons of it, but I just want to keep my response for now short. And then we can talk about why do we believe that is important, etc. Let me just give you a short word.
Good to keep it bouncing around, and also because I want to bring Jonathan in here now. I just wonder, because you see a lot of people again grappling with these. What do you see as sort of again the way that most of the clients that you work with or corporates that you're advising, what are you seeing them doing, and how are they thinking about the whole structuring issue? Are they thinking about it enough even at the beginning?
It's a great question. And I think that the different points of view are well represented with the operators we have on this panel. And Byron and I have seen, I think, just about every permutation on this model, right? Where you have something, more like Gurdeep and what he's been talking about, where we're going to be developing sort of internal businesses as their own companies to provide a lot of value to our customers in the broader organization. And that's a very distinct model and strategic rationale from, something that's more akin to what Eva or Lena were mentioning, where, and I'll frame sort of it as, I like to think of these things as a spectrum, because every organization is different, and you have to decide. I think the most important thing to have a successful venture studio, you need to start with your goals and your philosophy, right? What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to create a lot of value internally and for our customers? Are we trying to take some IP that might die on the vine and put it in businesses and get entrepreneurs to run it? Are we trying to solve a problem where maybe we're not very good at scaling something from 0 to 100, but we're very good at scaling something from 100 to 1 billion, right? Or are we trying to create, maybe we're trying to create opportunities for for our incredible employee base who's very talented, where we say we already have all of this talent here. And one of the ways we could support that talent is by maybe taking projects they're working on or projects they want to work on, put it into a new entity, fund it when we think it's ready for that, and then maybe graduate it out of our program when we can have a third-party VC come in. And these models, it's not right or wrong. And it isn't that one model is better than the other. it is that they serve different strategic goals. And I think a lot of the time that we spend with clients is figuring out how are we going to align the structure that Byron was talking about before with your strategic objectives, and what are the potential pros and cons of the various approaches that we've seen. And if you're going to be structuring this in a way where you say, I want to greenlight an idea when it's ready, I want to recruit individual founders and sort of build a startup that I'm going to fund, and then, you know, release it into the world, right? And we talk about with them, like, how much support are you going to give them initially? What does that relationship look like? And then what does graduating that company look like, right? Is it, is it when we sell it to a third party? Is it when a VC comes in and leads a future round? And once we understand the strategic goals of our clients, we can then help them pick a structure, navigate and deploy that structure effectively to align with those goals.
Can I ask a little cheeky question? And don't name any names, but I mean, how often do you deal with a situation where somebody hasn't really done that foundational thinking and then comes to you and says, oh, you know, we're actually halfway through building this thing now, but we need to pivot the structure, or we didn't think about this sufficiently. Can you help us save it now?
Yeah, I mean, it's often, and that's part of the reason for that is because Byron and I are really specialists in this regard. We see so much of this stuff and we have so many of these conversations that often when we're talking to people, we regularly hear like, no one has thought about it this way before. And a lot of people are trying to do this on their own because there are some very large, well-known studios that are out there, like Science, who've been doing this for a very long time. And there are others that I think are sort of best in class, that we've seen of late. I think some of those are actually featured on our panel today. If you're not falling into one of those buckets, or if you're interested in this and you haven't been speaking with people who have done this before, it's hard to figure out what structure you should have, right? Are you going to have employees in a studio that are, former investment professionals that are eager to start building ventures, right? How are you going to compensate those people, right? Should they be getting a stake in each of the startups that they're building? How is that going to reflect within the broader, compensation limitations and, sort of rubric that applies to people at the corporate more generally, right? These aren't things that, if you haven't spent time talking to people who've thought through these issues and who've lived with it, how are you supposed to know? Right. And that's why I'm excited that, we're here today, and also to learn from Eva and from Lena and from Gurdeep on their experiences with this, because they have truly varied backgrounds and philosophies, which is what I think makes this such a great group.
Yeah, this is it's just the ideal panel, really. And at this point, I just want to say to the audience as well, please don't hold back on your questions, because I know that a lot of people who are listening into this are probably, either practitioners themselves and might have something to share. Or if you're thinking about it and you have a specific question, please do use the Q&A function to we'll try to get those questions in as much as we can. But while we're waiting for questions to come in, I just want to sort of, a couple of people have touched on this, question of where do you hire your team from, for the ventures, and how do you compensate them? And so I'd again like to maybe ask our practitioners to start with that. I mean, maybe going to you first, Eva. It sounds like you guys have the expertise maybe in-house. Is that does it come from you guys, or do you then also draw in a little bit from the corporate, and how does that go?
So for the startups that we build, our internal team will do some light validation work before we make a decision to move forward to go hire the what we call founder in residence. And so we will go recruit. So we have a talent recruiting recruiting team, where their primary function is to go out and recruit founders. And for each of our companies, we will go and recruit that founder. And we also will recruit a venture advisor who is the AI fund representative, an extension of AI fund, who will help to advise each of our startups. And so together, the venture advisor and the founder in residence, plus people from our team, will go into a 3-month company co-building phase. And the people from our team would include our AI experts, and then we have builders on our team, and those are full-time employees on our side. And so it's basically a team of people that will work on co-building and further validating the business idea before we make a formal decision to pre-seed fund it.
But it sounds like some of the deep expertise stuff, at least in the beginning, comes from your own team. You recruit then. In terms of the external people that you recruit to this, the founder in residence, does that always come from outside? That's someone who's in the venture ecosystem in general?
So for the founders, it is outside recruit. We will do a lot of work in the beginning to validate an idea before we make a decision to go recruit. But then we have found that after, say, 1 month or so of our internal validation, it's best to go out and recruit that founder, the future lead of the company, as soon as we can thereafter, because the additional validation work that we do before we make a decision to fund or not fund a company, it's best when you do it in partnership with the future CEO, lead of the company. And so we've, through our experience and I would say evolution of how we've built companies, we've now aligned on trying to bring in that outside founder as soon as possible.
Okay. Yeah, that seems quite clear. Where do you stand on this, Lena? Because again, you have so many multiple scenarios that you look at, but do you recruit ever from inside the company?
The way we approach it is probably the mirror image of what Eva just described. So as a corporate, we lean on the studios for them to go and recruit. We could collaborate and participate in the interviewing and recruitment process, but that's a really niche group of people that have the profile to be a founder. I don't think you will find many of those within a large corporate, not those that have been for years and years. You may get surprised, maybe there are, but we lean on the studios to do that part of hiring, and on the providing expertise and advising. We have a lot of specialized talent within the company, so there is an ongoing conversation between the founder and some talent in the organization that could be representing a need that they are trying to solve for, or the market they are trying for which they are trying to develop a company. But the founder and the founders in general, that's the job of the venture studio to find. That's the way we see it.
Okay. All right. So again, quite a lot of external people joining to do the ventures part. Gurdeep, what's the norm for you guys?
I get this question about talent very often. And first of all, principle-wise, because we are building ventures and independent companies, we do, and also in the space of banking and financial services, we do need a very good combination. And the way we think about it is, what's the DNA do you need? And from a DNA perspective, you do need a combination of sector expertise. If you're building ventures in the space of financial services, you do need people who understand financial services and what it means to operate some regulated businesses. So we do need banking DNA. And people think that we can get it from outside or external, but actually external people also do come from financial services background. So we encourage a lot of our people. We have 85,000 staff across different markets to come and join some of these ventures at the start. We do complement that DNA with external DNA, which could come from product or from tech background. So we do complement the banking DNA or commercial DNA with product and tech DNA from the external world. And the key thing is twofold. One is you need to have diversity of thinking. I know of many examples where people who may not have any experience in a particular sector can do very well because you do bring fresh ideas. But as you mature, your understanding of how to operate in a regulated environment and how to operate in the institutional environment becomes very, very critical for success. And then somebody I think mentioned, which is what you need from a talent perspective from 0 to 1 may be very different from what you need from 1 to 10 and 10 to 100. So at the entire stage of the or life cycle of the venture, we keep evaluating whether the team we have put together is the right team to take a venture from X to Y. And that also is a constant thinking about talent, which I'm sure all ventures need to do. So that's how we approach talent.
Yeah. Okay.
From a diversity perspective.
Yeah, but there always seems to be quite a strong consensus that most of the talent is not going to come from your internal organization so much. But listen, there's an absolute ton of questions, and they're great ones. So I was wondering if we could maybe turn to those, and there's a couple that I'm going to sort of combine because they're really about the sort of structure. So I think a lot of people wanting to go a little bit deeper on this. And Byron, I might ping this one at you to start with, but Ralph Wilson asks, at what point do you formally set up the venture? So assign IP to the new co, employ the staff. How much runway, would the venture have at that point in time? And there's a couple of other people who just want to understand sort of how that structuring happens. But I wonder, Byron, if you can start us off with a kind of overview of what's maybe common.
I think that question is about the startups themselves versus the sort of corporate venture studio structure, in which case I'm going to call on Jonathan because that's where he comes into the picture when we team up on this.
Yeah. So thanks, Byron. I see a couple of themes with this question. So I think now's a good time to jump into sort of what does a greenlighting process look like and how do we think about it in what I would consider a structure that we see often, and I want to frame that properly. And then I want to also talk about cap table splits, to sort of when you're bringing, the startup into existence, again, under a certain type of model. And when I say a certain type of model, I mean a model where we have a venture studio that is looking to churn out multiple companies with the aim of bringing in at least one outside founder. Often it's multiple outside individual founders who are going to be taking an idea that was generated by the studio, sometimes in collaboration with those outside founders, start a new company from zero, right? Put some money into that company to serve essentially as like a pre-seed round, nurture it along the way, and then graduate it by having another investor come in and lead a future financing round. Okay, so that's not necessarily the approach that's taken by other folks on the panel, but that's the model that I think, when we think of a traditional venture studio that's looking to spin out companies, that's the model that we think about. And so how do we talk to clients about a greenlighting process? You need to have confidence as the studio that you believe in an idea enough that you can recruit individual co-founders to come to the idea and that there's enough product market fit that you'd be willing to invest in this thing. But we don't want the idea and the related intellectual property to be so far along that there's real value in it, in this model. And why is that? Because part of the allure of these models to individual founders when they're brought on board is that you are de-risking the pre-seed experience for them. Because what you're saying is, here's an idea, and maybe it's an idea we worked on together with the individual co-founder. We think it's a good idea. We think it has legs. We're willing to put some money into it up front. All right. And that money can vary depending on philosophies of the studios, et cetera. And so instead of you, individual co-founder, having to come up with your own idea, you really like this idea too. You're going to help bring it into existence, right? And you're sort of going to take the planning that we've done and maybe some of the product market fit testing we've done, and you're just going to run with this. But we want it to be early enough that we can say that this idea has essentially no value for tax purposes, so that a founder can come in and buy their equity, but for fractions of a penny a share, as if they were starting the company themselves from scratch, right? And that is de-risked because they know they already have an idea. They know they have the support of the venture studio. Maybe it's in the form of ongoing services that they're going to receive. And they also know that they're going to get funded. Often there has to be some demonstration of additional viability, but the idea is you're going to get at least some initial capital from the venture studio so you can go out, maybe build an MVP, with that cash and be in a position where you can raise much more effectively. And it could be because the venture studio will put even more money in, right? But it's this de-risking model. And so it's important that we get the idea far enough along that we believe in it, and we have individual co-founders who believe in it, but not so far along that we have like a fully baked business with customers that's generating revenue, because you can do those structures, but it creates a lot of complications for tax purposes. So that's the sort of archetype in terms of process that we're trying to create here, which involves risks from these studios, right? Which is why you need professionals in there who know the right type of testing they can do. And Ava was talking about this before, where, you know, and the more rigor and routine you have built into these processes to see if this really works, you know, the better. Because, you know, this is a core competency of a good venture studio, is coming up with these ideas and having enough belief in them at a very early stage that you're willing to fund them. So let's say we've greenlit an idea. What does the cap table look like? There are ranges, but here are the common themes that we see. And again, in this model where the goal is to have a startup that other investors will be willing to fund, right, which is very important. Here's the model that we view as pretty effective in terms of some guideposts. Okay, so let's start with the venture studio. They're going to be getting their common co-founder stake, right? And sort of co-founder stake, even though they're not like an individual co-founder in the business, but they did create the idea. Generally, we see that venture studios are getting more for their contributions to the business than an ordinary accelerator would get, right? And so if an ordinary accelerator is getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 8% for participating, you know, for having a startup that already has an idea and already has founders participating in their program, a venture studio who has recruited the founders, come up with the idea, and is really giving this idea to the startup, they will get usually somewhere in between 10 and 20% of the initial fully diluted cap table in the form of common stock. That is usually fully vested, but sometimes not if there's going to be an ongoing service relationship. Okay, so that's how that's going to work. They're also going to set aside an equity incentive pool for future hires after these initial co-founders that will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20%, depending on what they think the initial hiring needs are. And that leaves the remainder of the cap table, which can be anywhere from 60 to 80%. And who does that go to? That goes to the individual co-founders. And it depends how many of them that there are in terms of sometimes how that gets split. Importantly, I talked before that the whole purpose of this model is sort of like de-risking the pre-seed experience for founders. That's one of the allures of it when you're recruiting individual co-founders. And the studio should expect to get more of the company when they invest. So how much more of the company are they going to get? What we like to think, the way I like to explain this here is that general prevailing market principles for a pre-seed investment apply just as well to when a venture studio invests cash into one of the startups that they are incubating, right? And so it depends how much money they're putting in and sort of the instrument that's being used, right? So if you're going to put in, you know, $500,000 on a safe or something like that, you're not going to be getting nearly as much of the cap table if you're putting in $2 million in a preferred stock financing. But let's say you're putting in $2 million in a preferred stock financing. Normally out in the market for a Series C or something like that, you'd be expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 25% of the cap table. So if you're going to get 20% of the cap table from that as an example, plus 20% of the common, that leaves you with 40% of the overall company. And the important thing that we think is a critical guidepost for venture studios, and again, this goes to the ability of these startups to get funded by VCs in the future, because we're dealing with this model where we want to greenlight it, get the company going, and then graduate it by having another investor come in and lead the next financing round. We want the venture studio's stake to be smaller than the stake held by the individual co-founders plus the option pool. And generally that means that we are telling our venture studios to keep their overall stake, both the common stake and their investment stake, at 45% or less. And again, easier to do that when you're putting more money into the company. But if you're going to put in $500,000 and expect 25% of the cap table, I mean, you can do that, but then you risk sort of coming in and a future investor saying, wait a minute, what did the studio really do here? Is it market to take, 25% of a cap table for 250 grand or 500 grand? It's not. That doesn't mean that those deals don't happen outside of a studio context, but they are infrequent. And so studios that are going to be trying to take as much of the cap table as possible, again, in this model, not in a model like the one Gurdeep is talking about, which is wholly different. And I don't think these principles apply to that model. But in the type of model that I'm talking about, these are the guideposts that we encourage our studio clients to think about.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love the fact, Jonathan, that you've ripped the plaster right off that issue that is the most tricky one for all of these is, you know, who gets to own what. And that I think is one of the biggest sticking points in these. But I think you've referenced Gurdeep, so I'd love to ping that to Gurdeep, because I think, you know, this whole thing. So, you know, how much of an ownership stake is it reasonable for the company to have, given the, you know, investment help, whatever that goes into it, and then how do you marry that with the venture that comes out then being truly sort of market investable?
As I listened, processing what Jonathan was saying, I think the first principles first, you have to obviously award the founding team with equity. So that's one which very few venture studios are still doing. That fundamental principle is there in place for us. From a ownership perspective, I would say we are evolving and also trying different models. The first thing is very important to know who's putting the capital, right? I know there's a market expectation to say, why don't you give all the equity to the founders or most of the equity to the founders so that you're investable? We are seeing a very different approach and also a different test of the market. This is what everybody tells us. But if the mothership or the strategic investor or the studio, for lack of a better word, is putting in millions of dollars into the venture from pre-seed to seed to scale, I think it's kind of very odd for me to say, oh, but founders still have a lot of equity. This works when the founders have also put in their own money into these ventures. Then there's a case to be made that they have fair amount of equity. But if they have not put in their capital, and you are talking about, and to your point, the idea comes from us, or from the studio, the mothership or the main institution has brought in a lot of access to clients and business ideas, also business model testing and providing the governance of it, then it is fair to say that the parent or the studio has the majority stake in the venture, and then the founders have X%. We can debate what that number is, whether it is 20 or 25, but that's the 80-20 principle. Over a period of time, absolutely, you are talking about bringing in strategic investors. Now I know that I keep hearing that, oh, but you know, when a VC is coming in, they want to invest in the founders, and they're expecting them to have majority stake. Even that, by the way, is evolving. That narrative is completely evolving, because you're not talking about financial investors, you're talking about strategic investors. So if you are bringing in another bank in the mix, or if you're bringing the third bank or the third corporate in the mix, I don't think they're pointing your finger to say, no, but I'm investing in the founder team. They need to be incentivized enough that they are reaching out and making the venture scalable and marketable. But that doesn't, I would say, discourage other strategic and even the CVCs, which we have right now, lots of CVCs. That is the big evolution which is happening from VCs to CVCs. Earlier, when the pool was predominantly VC money, the VCs was calling the shot to say, if I'm putting the money, I really want the founders to have the majority stake. But if you look at the combination, which is, but this is the studio which is putting in more money, and there is another strategic investor or a CVC coming in, over a period of time, if you look at the long run, it kind of evens out. A successful, scalable venture or an entity, anyways, the founders do not have more than 20%. They anyways have less than 20% when you're scalable. So you're providing that platform to make it a scalable venture, and they have a fair stake of something which has a potential to be a lot more scalable and successful at the back of the corporate partnerships which corporate ventures can put together. Hopefully that makes sense. That's what we are, how we're approaching that.
But yeah, quite a different set of rules. I think, Lena, this would be a good point to bring you in and say, you know, how have you typically done these in terms of the ownership structure?
When we think of the structure of the startups that we are creating, we want to give them a life of their own. So, and we want them to be very attractive for the investment of third parties. So we want to create the type of startups that other corporate venture funds will be happy to invest in. So normally we go in with around 15 to 20 sometimes less. The venture studio, then the rest of the equation is similar to what we heard from Jonathan in terms of the venture building studio getting between 10 and 20. And then we allocate the rest to the founders, because then the founders have a long road ahead of them, and they will be diluted as they would, and we will get diluted as next funding rounds come. So that's how we approach it. And also to kind of comment on the earlier question of how we make sure it's successful and when to green light it. I think, as we are saying, this comes in all shades, but I think I will invite also the audience to think of it from two different angles. Sometimes there are companies that are created with technology first approach, and some others are with opportunity area or problem first approach. And how you move from a technology first approach to green light is different of how you move the other. So when you have a technology first approach is when you have the IP in a company or when you have the IP in a university. It's like you discover something and then you somehow need to have a technology push, how to find the market fit for that. And I guess in that sense, how you look for success is you need to kind of challenge your potential biases towards that technology, because then companies will love their own IP, universities will love their own IP, or companies as well. But a different story will happen if you put it in the hands of founders, and then if you try to find out if actually there is a traction and an intention in the market to have a demand for that potential solution. So there is a long path that needs to go to, that companies will have to go through. So we wouldn't green light something before there has been some sort of a market fit validation, because we are starting with a very biased approach of this is a fantastic IP. On the other hand, when you start with a problem opportunity area approach, you know there is a need, but you still don't really know the pathway of the exact technology that will make sense or that will be the winning approach to a solution. So there needs to be a lot of desktop exercise, and this links to some of the questions that I saw in the chat, of complex deep tech or climate solutions. I think there needs to be enough and a long period. Sometimes we spend over a year and more analyzing, multiple pathways to what could be a real approach that can be economically viable, commercially viable as a solution. And only at that point, with enough hypothesis that this could work, we will green light it. So because of all these efforts that have been done by the venture studio and by the company, then that's where we said, okay, we take, let's say, 15-15 or 20-20, and then the rest goes to the founder, because from that point on, there's a long road. And it's from that point that other founders, strategic founders, investors, may come and keep contributing to the success of the company.
Yeah. I think, Jonathan, you had some responses to this.
I think Gurdeep's perspective is well taken and emphasizes just how different these models can be. If you have a corporate that's funding a startup for its life across multiple stages, where you've given them the idea, you put the idea into the startup, you've nurtured it and helped it scale. It has its own management team, but ultimately its success really hinges on how tied it is to the broader organization, and the organization's funding it for, most, if not all of its life. Founders will obviously have a much smaller stake. It's a completely different approach, as I had mentioned before. When you're looking more at something like what Lena was mentioning, it has a different goal. The goal there is to both create an organization that can be valuable to the strategic, but also to provide a financial return, and to be able to, get access to an investment opportunity at a very early stage that you're not necessarily going to get because you've created the idea yourself. And the success there is often measured not just by the long-term strategic value, but in the short term by identifying whether it is another CVC who's coming in or a VC who's coming in to lead. But the goal there is to have an organization that will stand up on its own and maybe has the corporate mothership as a customer or a vendor, but not as you know, but with the hope that it will grow into a much larger business on its own and scale. Maybe to a point where the corporate mothership decides, hey, we actually would like to buy this company and bring it back into the fold because it's created this incredible business that, you know, it's realized well beyond its potential that what we ever thought it would be. And I think on the greenlighting process, Lena's absolutely right. It is not a one-size-fits-all model. It really depends what you're doing. I know that, you know, Ava's process and the process at AI Fund is rigorous, but it's also malleable, right? You know, for based on the different corporates that they're working with and how they figure out how to greenlight something. So I think it's important to, again, understand your goals as a studio, both for the corporate and sort of long-term for these ventures. And you can have lots of different goals and they may not always work in harmony, but the more work you do up front to figure that out and to be thoughtful about it, you can then build processes and start making some of these decisions about what the cap table looks like. What's the governance structure going to look like, right? We often have in sort of the model that I've been talking about for most of the time here today, you know, that there are very tight governance controls before graduation. But at graduation, there tends to be a willingness by the studio to make the governance look a lot more like any other VC-backed company that tends to be, you know, pretty market and ideally down the middle. And I think good venture studios are also including in their interim shareholders agreement provisions that say, hey, I know we've got a lot of these, like, you know, maybe tight governance controls, but they're all going to fall away when you do your equity financing, and then we're going to rely on like sort of market standard stuff. Now, that doesn't work for every studio, but I think a lot of studios deploy something like that. Gurdeep, I know that you'd wanted to jump in.
Now, just reflecting, and I think I wanted to share something with the audience who's also listening. Personally, I'm beginning to think that this, how much share who has, and I saw the Q&A also, there's a lot of focus on it. I think probably that's not the right focus also, because I personally believe if the venture is successful, meaning it is creating value for its clients and it is growing, investment is bound to come. I don't think investment or the marketability or scalability comes in the way, which is, oh, who holds what share, number one. Number two, there's also a very important factor to think about. As I said, the pool of investors have changed. In fact, we have successfully raised funding for most of our ventures already. So the notion that, and it is not because we want to hold on to these ventures, we believe the ventures can be scaled with strategic partners, not necessarily all the time with financial investors. It can be scaled with strategic partners, but also think about from a corporate point of view. I think Dina was mentioning, or somebody, I think Eva was mentioning, what's the end game, right? You could create a venture where you are the majority holding. Also think from an accounting or a P&L point of view, where the revenues get consolidated to the main entity. And you can either go minority and then later on want to acquire it, or you can start with majority and you can wind down, or you can slowly deconsolidate. These are some of the choices, which is why the why and the how need to be agreed upfront. And Jonathan, you're right? It's not about which model is right or wrong. It's about what considerations and what's your end game. Financial returns, then of course, scale down and start and give 20% and you have a bet and you can make a lot more bets. If you're thinking of creating large options for the corporate, where these ventures or revenues get consolidated and it adds to your core business mix, evolves over a period of time, then your choices will be very different. What is fundamental is structure it in a way so that both these options are available to you. That to me, structuring is very important. Structure it in a way that these options are available to you and you can choose what you want to do.
Yeah. So again, back to that, thinking about that structure right up front. We're coming to the last sort of 5 minutes. So I'd love to go back to Eva, because I think there's a couple of questions here that are specifically, I think there was one, we've talked a lot about ownership structure, and I don't know whether you want to chime in with how you would solve that. But there's also I had a couple of specific questions here about just how many people you had on your internal team, and whether you treat any of the managers at the studio as investors. I wonder whether you could speak to any of those.
On the cap table side, I think I hear what all the other panelists have said, and agree with different points. At AI Fund, we definitely see the value of giving a lot of equity to the team and making sure there's sufficient amount to keep them incentivized to continue building. But we do also recognize the value that we bring to the table and the value that our corporate partners bring to the table. So the equity is, I would say, largely what Jonathan described aligns with how we do things, but happy to go in more detail, maybe offline with people who, if they want to connect separately. But then the other question about how many people are on our team. So full-time employees, not sure if that's the question, but we have about 20 people on our team. And that includes, we have builders, we have our AI experts, and then we have our recruiting team, and then we have our ops team. And then
presumably they're working across quite a lot of the, multiple ventures at the same time, so that you can kind of pool those resources in a very nice and efficient way, right? Like you don't need to have three people who are all legal experts. You can.
That's right. That's right. So we have 4 builders, and they will each work on different projects, several at a time. Not too many, because bandwidth wise, they need to be able to focus. So they'll do a few projects at a time, and then they're obviously working with the founders and residents that I mentioned earlier that are external people, and those are focused specifically on the projects they've been engaged for. And our AI experts also work on multiple projects at a time. One of our actually portfolio companies, they basically train AI talent, and then they outsource them. And so we actually utilize some of their team to be able to leverage ourselves and be able to utilize more AI engineers as needed. Internally, we do have full-time engineers on staff, but then we're able to scale up as needed by utilizing our portfolio companies' services.
And in terms of those people who are on staff, so the builders who are basically employees of the venture builder, do they get any kind of upside in terms of if the projects that they work on take off?
So the builders will not be compensated specifically for a company that they've worked on, but as a whole, we're structured as a fund, like a VC fund, and so we have carried interest, and we share that with the team. And we also have other incentive programs. We have a virtual share program that we utilize to incentivize our team as well, and that is basically help compensating them through the common stock ownership we have in our portfolio companies. But again, it's not project specific. Okay. It's more as a whole.
Yeah. Okay. No, but in a way, there is a mechanism, I guess, for them to see the fruits of their labors.
For sure.
So I'm afraid, I mean, we have so many other questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of them, but we are kind of at the top of the hour now. I wanted to kind of give a final question really to Byron, because this was asked in the Q&A, and I think we could get fascinating answers, but I just think if we go to one person, why do you think, Byron, we're seeing such a kind of upsurge in interest in this venture studio model now, not just from CVCs, but from VCs also? I'm just wondering if you're hearing anything from the, again, companies that you're speaking to.
It's a super interesting question that I've thought about a lot, because there's been, this massive surge, and especially in the last 6 months to a year, but it was sort of gradually picking up before that, in the, the whole venture ecosystem, including founders, VCs, as someone highlighted in one of the questions, and corporates like we're talking about today. We are seeing lots of VCs are saying, hey, how can I sort of work in a couple of incubations into my VC structure? And corporates similar, saying what we've talked about today. And I don't have a super clear answer to it, but I think it's a very productive and healthy evolution of the venture environment, because, you know, traditionally we've had, well, options of A, I'm going to start a company, or B, I'm going to start a fund and figure out how to invest in companies. And this is really a very different hybrid kind of opportunity, which is, well, I'm good at starting companies, and this can go for corporates that say, you know, a variation on that, saying, well, I'm good at starting companies, or I have all sorts of assets that can be potentially turned into companies, and I just need a platform where I can do that on repeat and start just spitting out companies. And I think the reason it's catching on is that it's a fresh new way of feeding this venture-backed startup ecosystem by all parties. And it's there's a lot. One reason that I speculate is that during the pandemic there was a massive proliferation of early stage venture capital funds. There's also a massive proliferation of founders who got successful exits or whatever, and there's all these, and people were starting to look for different types of ways of coming back into the market that were, it was also became very, very hard to raise early stage venture capital funds for the last 2 years. And so this has been a new model that a lot of people have been trying, and the corporates have caught on, and I think it is a perfect fit for kind of a third option in the market.
Yeah, and I guess it'll be one that we'll watch with interest to see what comes from this new wave. But I am super conscious that we are over time, so I'm gonna at this point say a very big thank you to the panel. You've shared, a lot of your expertise with no reservations, and that I think hopefully that's been really illuminating for everyone. So Jonathan Sagot, Byron Dailey, Lena Arbelaz, Eva Wang, and Gurdeep Singh Kohli, thank you so much. I'm just going to give you a couple of housekeeping slides, just in terms of if you enjoyed this webinar, then you might want to consider some of our in-person events, which are listed on this page. So we have a couple of Connect events, which are sort of smaller group gatherings. We're doing a new territory in the Nordics in September, and then there are various other events coming throughout the autumn. So from the Executive Leadership Forum, the Venture in Brazil, our Connect event in Germany, the Asia Congress, and so on. The next webinar will be in August 14th. And I think this will be another really fascinating variation on, this, because if we're talking about the fact that lots of, venturing groups are really looking at a multiplicity of different tools to use. Venture studios are one, but venture clienting, where you're sort of becoming an early stage client for startups without necessarily investing in them, is another trend that's picking up. And we're going to be looking at whether, is it sort of CVC platforms or venture clienting the best way to get the best out of those startup relationships. So do join in for that. And for everyone who stayed until the bitter end, thank you so much. I've been Maya Palmer. You can contact me if there's any details that you'd like about this webinar. We will show a replay of this on the GCV website in a couple of, I think about 2 days time. And everyone who's signed in for the webinar will get a sort of roundup in their inbox. So thank you again. And also a very big thank you to Fenwick. I did forget to mention this, but this webinar was brought to you supported by Fenwick, and that's very important, because actually for us to be able to do this and continue kind of bringing out these really important topics, it's nice to have good partners like this to work with. So thank you again to both the Fenwick team who were on this call today.